"If you can play this piano, I will give you all my wealth," the billionaire said, his voice dripping with mockery. Laughter erupted through the grand mansion as guests whispered about the little girl who dared to approach. 5 years old, fragile, with messy black curls, the daughter of a janitor, they called her a nobody, incapable of anything extraordinary. Yet she walked forward, small hands trembling slightly, carrying a courage that stunned everyone. The chandeliers reflected off polished floors, but the light could not match the presence of a child who had nothing but would soon command everything in the room. The billionaire smirked, thinking this would be entertaining, but the air was thick with anticipation. Every eye followed her tiny steps, disbelief and curiosity mingling. She climbed onto the piano bench, exhaled slowly, and the silence swallowed the mansion. Nobody yet knew the power that would come from these tiny hands, the kind that could humble the richest of men and echo far beyond the walls. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the little girl's small fingers hovered over the ivory keys. The guests leaned forward, mocking smiles fading into cautious stares. The billionaire crossed his legs, sipping his champagne with a smirk, convinced this would end in humiliation. But there was something in her eyes, calm, steady, almost defiant, that unsettled even the proudest men in the room. She closed her eyes and drew a slow breath, her fragile frame dwarfed by the massive piano. Yet her presence commanded attention greater than any chandelier or golden statue. Every heartbeat in the mansion seemed to pause, waiting for the first sound. Whispers swirled like smoke. "She's just a child. She'll fail." But the air had shifted, heavier, sharper, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. And then, with a grace that no one expected, her tiny hands pressed down the first note, and the room was never the same again. The first note rang out soft yet powerful, carrying a weight that silenced every whisper. Her tiny fingers began to move, trembling at first, then flowing with a rhythm that felt impossible for a child so young. The melody rose, pure and flawless, weaving through the golden hall like a force of nature. The guests froze, eyes wide, their arrogance crumbling with every chord. How could a janitor's daughter, a 5-year-old girl in worn shoes, summon such beauty? The music wasn't just sound, it was a story. Each note carried struggle, hope, and a truth that money could never purchase. The billionaire's smirk faltered, his glass lowering slowly, his confidence shaken. What was meant to be entertainment was transforming into humiliation. The girl's small hands danced with impossible grace, and in that moment, the richest people in the room realized they were the poorest when compared to the soul of a child, who had nothing but music burning within her. The melody swelled, filling the grand mansion with a sound that seemed to pierce straight through the soul. The air grew heavy, almost sacred, as if time itself bowed to the music of a child. The guests who had mocked her now sat frozen, eyes glistening, their pride collapsing under the weight of her gift. Some covered their mouths, ashamed of their earlier laughter. Others leaned forward, desperate to understand how such power could come from such tiny hands. Each note carried innocence, pain, and beauty so raw it stripped away the arrogance that once ruled the room. The billionaire, once smug and unshakable, shifted uneasily in his chair, his face pale. He had meant to humiliate her, to turn her into a joke. Instead, he was being undone before his own guests. With every rising chord, the truth became undeniable. Greatness does not come wrapped in wealth or titles. It comes from the purity of the heart. And tonight, it belonged to the janitor's daughter. The final notes lingered in the air like whispers from heaven, delicate yet unshakable. Then, silence. Not a single sound echoed through the hall. The chandeliers seemed frozen, the laughter that once mocked her completely erased. Every guest sat in stunned stillness, their eyes locked on the little girl who had just reshaped their world. Some were trembling, others were quietly wiping tears they hoped no one would notice. The billionaire's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor, but no one flinched. Every soul was still captured by the echoes of her music. The janitor, standing at the back of the hall, lowered his head, his heart swelling with pride as his daughter sat small and fragile on the piano bench, yet greater than anyone in that room. The girl turned her gaze upward, innocent and unbothered, as if she hadn't just humbled kings and millionaires with the gift of her hands. In that silence, respect was born. For a long moment, the billionaire sat frozen. His pride shattered, his arrogance stripped bare in front of everyone. His mocking challenge had turned into a stage for his humiliation. The guests, once loyal to his laughter, now looked at him with disdain, their respect drifting toward the little girl on the piano bench. His lips trembled as he finally spoke, his voice low, unsteady, and almost broken. You've done the impossible," he muttered, his words tasting like defeat. All the wealth in the world suddenly felt worthless, every dollar powerless. Against the innocence and brilliance of a janitor's daughter, the room held its breath, waiting for his next move. At last, he rose slowly from his chair, his champagne forgotten, and bowed his head, not in authority but in surrender. In that single gesture, the mighty had fallen, and a child had risen higher than the tallest towers of gold. The little girl looked at the billionaire, her innocent eyes calm and unshaken. She had no hunger for gold, no desire for power, only the purity of her music. Slowly she shook her head and spoke, with a quiet voice that carried louder than any thunder in that hall. "I don't want your wealth," she said. "My father taught me that music is a treasure no one can take, and love is the richest gift of all." The room gasped, their hearts pierced by the simplicity of her truth. The billionaire, humbled and broken, lowered his gaze, ashamed that a child had more wisdom than all his years of riches. The janitor stepped forward, his eyes filled with tears, watching his daughter's courage outshine every diamond in the room. The guests whispered in awe, realizing they had witnessed something priceless. In that moment, the child proved what the world forgets. Real wealth is never counted in money, it is carried in the soul. Hand in hand, the little girl climbed down from the piano bench, her tiny footsteps echoing louder than applause. The janitor, her father, stepped forward, his eyes shining with pride as he knelt to embrace her. Together they turned toward the door, their heads held high, leaving behind a hall of stunned billionaires and silenced guests. The mansion, once filled with arrogance and laughter, now trembled in the quiet weight of shame and respect. Whispers broke the silence, soft, uncertain voices asking, "Who is she? How could she play like that? How could a janitor's daughter humble us all?" Yet she didn't look back. The chandeliers above seemed dimmer, the gold and marble less grand, for all the wealth in that room had been defeated by the soul of a child. As they stepped into the night, the world inside the mansion would never be the same again. The doors closed softly behind them, and the silence that remained was louder than any storm. The billionaire stood motionless, his empire of pride collapsing around him. He had built towers of gold, yet a 5-year-old child had torn them down with a melody. His guests no longer looked at him with admiration, but with disappointment, even pity. For the first time in his life, he felt small, smaller than the little girl he had mocked. He sank back into his chair, the weight of his arrogance pressing heavier than his wealth ever could. Around him, murmurs spread, each whisper cutting deeper than the last. Respect had shifted, and it no longer belonged to him. In that moment, he understood a truth he had spent. A lifetime ignoring power means nothing without humility, and money is empty without love. The billionaire bowed his head, a fallen king humbled by the music of a janitor's daughter. Word of that night spread far beyond the mansion walls. Stories traveled from city to city, of a little girl who silenced billionaires and humbled the proud with nothing but music. Videos, whispers, and headlines carried her name, but she and her father returned quietly to their simple life, untouched by fame or fortune. The world was left with a lesson it could not ignore. Greatness is never measured by money, nor status, nor power. It is found in the purity of heart, in the courage to stand tall when mocked, and in the strength to remain humble when victory is yours. The billionaire's wealth remained, but his pride was gone, replaced by a wound that reminded him daily of a truth he had once mocked. And so, the story lived on, that a janitor's daughter, only 5 years old, played a piano not just with her hands, but with a soul that proved richer than kings.